Hey, everybody. Welcome in. It is the Utopia Football Podcast, mailbag edition, our first mailbag after the playoffs ended last Saturday in Kansas City. So a lot of you want to weigh in both on that game, the upcoming offseason. We've got a lot to get to still with the Texans and with the playoffs and a whole lot more. Great to be with you. I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon. I apologize, a little late into the week. We will be back on a normal Wednesday schedule for the mailbag next week. It's just that this week with the Texans on Saturday and wanted to kind of just take it a little easy for a few days. It snowed here in Houston for a couple of days as well. That should have made it easier for me to podcast. I wasn't leaving to go anywhere, but a lot like the players just want to unwind and get away for a couple of days. I kind of wanted to do that too when it came to content generation. But the good news is I'm here now. I didn't take much more time off than a couple of days from the podcast. So we're into the off season now. We'll be on a 2-episode per week schedule. It would appear that's what the off season has entailed the last couple of years. I think this is my third off season that I'll have doing Utopia. The first year was with John McClain. Last year, I think it was largely just me doing the podcast. So there will be a mailbag episode every week. There'll be a second episode just to address any other things going on with free agency and the drafts coming up. That's a pretty easy time of year to get 2 episodes. I always leave open the possibility for emergency episodes if big things happen. For example, if Bobby Slowick were to get fired, like tomorrow, would probably jump on and do a quick episode tomorrow, that kind of thing. So a lot of you asking about Slowick in the mailbag, so we'll certainly get to that. But quick reminder on a few administrative things. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to make sure that you're getting the podcast automatically. You can see right here, if you're watching on YouTube, my wife still has happy birthday balloons up on the window because it was her birthday 2 weeks ago. It was my birthday yesterday. So middle of January is big in our house, big birthday time. And I've eaten more cake in the last 10 days than probably the rest of the year combined. I'm not a big sweets guy, but middle of January, I stuffed myself full of cake. I'm in a diabetic coma by the time February rolls around. So anyways, hit the subscribe button, rate the podcast, review the podcast, do whatever you want. It's your deal, but it helps the podcast when you do all of those things. We're going to have a mailbag episode. houmailbag@gmail.com is the email address. Love seeing some new blood in there, some of the old regulars and the new blood in there. We usually get to about 8 to 10 questions in the mailbag each week. houmailbag@gmail.com. So we'll get to the mailbag in just a second. As far as general things going on with the Texans, Danielle Hunter is on his way to the Pro Bowl. There was one of the defensive ends, I'm not even sure who it was, had to back out. Danielle's first alternate. So he's going to go. So that's 5 Texans that'll be at the Pro Bowl, assuming that they're all going. I'm assuming they're all going to be going. Why not? It's a free trip to Orlando. All you got to do is play backyard barbecue games with a bunch of dudes, a little flag football, little 3-legged race, a little potato sack race, some Parcheesi. So Danielle Hunter, Laramie Tunsil, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, and Derek Stingley Jr. I actually have a hot take about this. And I thought of it when Danielle Hunter was named today, knowing how stoic and quiet he is. Now, he's an intimidating quiet, I will say that. Very intimidating. But knowing how quiet he is, I don't know that we're sending the best guys there to recruit and tamper with other teams' players. Will Anderson Jr. was really good at that last year. Remember Will last year said how people were coming up to him at the Pro Bowl and telling him, hey, I want to be a Texan. And Will was having to say it's not for everybody. Remember that in training camp? That was that press conference Will did at the beginning of training camp where he came out wearing a wife beater T-shirt and he looked like he'd put on 50 pounds of solid muscle. It was really probably closer to 20 pounds, but he looked huge. But I remember him saying that about the Pro Bowl. From that standpoint, I think I'd rather send Will than Danielle. No disrespect to Danielle, and please don't anybody tell him because he could squash my brains with his index finger and thumb like this. But I don't know that we're sending the best guy. I think Mixon's a good recruiter. He proclaimed himself a good recruiter the other day. But Nico is super quiet. Stingley, I don't even know if Stingley speaks English. He barely talks. Danielle Hunter, very quiet. And Laramie Tunsil, I think Laramie is just there probably to go to Disney World and hang out and wear his skinny jeans and whatnot. So, yeah, I don't know. We're sending 5 guys, and they all deserve to be there, even Laramie. But I don't know if we're sending the best guys. to tamper with other teams' free agents, or not even free agents, just their players. Just that tampering is not really a free agent it's not really tampering if it's a free agent. So, anyways, I say all that to say congratulations, Daniil, for making the Pro Bowl. Chris Strauss is out as the offensive line coach, according to an Aaron Wilson report. He will be parting ways with the team. He was pondering retirement before the season last year. Don't know how to feel about that. But the Texans will be looking for a new O-line coach. This is a sneaky big hire for the Texans, this O-line coach hire. And I know there'd been some talk about an internal promotion, Cole Popovich. I don't know anything about Cole Popovich other than he's on the staff right now. I don't think that would excite people. It's hard to excite people with an O-line hire, but based on the text page to Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610, if they hired Mike Munchak to be the offensive line coach, you guys would be to the moon and back. So you never know. He's quasi-retired. He's a consultant for the Rams right now. So we'll see if he wants to dip his toe back in the water. If he's got the itch to coach again. He's 64 years old. But they got to get this one right. And then we're still waiting to see if there's anything going on with the rest of the staff. I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of movement going on the defensive side. Defense was really good this year. But Bobby Slowick is the big one. D'Amico did not exactly have a glowing answer for Bobby's performance in 2024. He didn't say anything bad. It was just a short answer where he gave I saw growth and improvement. Crickets, 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 crickets. That's what it was like. There was crickets in the press conference room. So wait on Bobby Slowick. I'm still, if I were wagering, betting that Bobby will be back next year. My big issue with this is that when you have a young quarterback on a rookie contract, it feels so backwards to me to have an offensive coordinator that you're growing with as well. Like that. If you bring Bobby back, it's because you believe that there's some growing that he needs to do and had to do, and that the step backwards that he and the offense took in 2024 in his second season. And I don't even want to hear an argument they didn't take a step backwards. They took a step backwards. That somehow this is just like CJ Stroud, part of the bumps in the road of becoming a good offensive coordinator. In the case of CJ, a good quarterback. It's such a different world when you're talking about a coach. Like, we all got to wait around because the coach will bring people down with him. So will the quarterback, but obviously the quarterback, I'm leaning more towards replacing Bobby. I need to see what the names look like. Seth has brought up Chip Kelly multiple times this week. That's very interesting to me. Very interesting. So we'll see what happens there. We'll be keeping an eye on that. Again, that is emergency podcast worthy if need be. All right, let's get into the mailbag. HOU mailbag at gmail.com. And we'll start it off in Budapest with Dennis. Dennis is in Budapest. And he says, I have a bad feeling. It has nothing to do with the Chiefs. Anytime they show D'Amico on the sidelines, he's super excited with everyone. Everyone except Frank Ross. He's much more reserved with him. I have a bad feeling about this. Please tell me I'm off. H is up. Now, if I got this email before the Kansas City game, I would have said, balderdash. They're fine with each other. Now, I could see that game. If you're basing it off of the Kansas City game, then D'Amico had every right to be pissed off with Frank. His special teams were dog shit in that game. They were awful. Every aspect of special teams. Coverage was terrible. Punting was terrible. Place kicking was abysmal. I think D'Amico and Frank Ross are fine. And I think Frank Ross is a good coach. I think he's a good coach whose unit had a horrible, horrible day at the worst possible time. That's the worst special teams game I can remember a Texans team playing. And that's saying something because their special teams under Joe Marciano during the Kubiak era were really bad, like really, really bad. And even during parts of the Bill O'Brien era, like the fact that like Albert Blue was on the team for special teams, like it was just, God. Let's keep it moving. Chuck is in Denver and he says, hey, Sean, great season by you. Thanks for what you do. You're welcome, Chuck. Frustrating ending, especially knowing how it would end before the season started. Well, that's a pessimistic view, Chuck. We knew the O-line was a major weakness. I think if CJ gets sacked 3 times instead of 8 in that Kansas City game, we're talking about a different outcome. Obviously, the special teams were a nightmare. I didn't see that coming. I've been beefing with a buddy who says Kaimi is not a clutch kicker. I fought him with stats about his production only to see him have his worst career game on Saturday. I can't see bringing him back next year after that showing of Frank Ross. I asked Casario to cut him. All right, I'm going to stop there. There's more. Chuck has more, but I'm going to stop there. They're not cutting Kaimi Fairbairn. They're not. He just got a big contract extension. There's other guys. I think you'd be a little upside down if you were cutting Kaimi. Now, I wouldn't mind them bringing in some competition for Kaimi in training camp. I do not like the fact that he's just been anointed the kicker every single year. I wouldn't mind seeing a kicker brought in just to put some heat on him. I think his kicking outdoors, especially outdoors in cold weather, is a major concern for this team. I think you're right. I just don't think they're cutting him. That's all. If they did, and they had a better solution in place, or maybe not quite as good, but a much cheaper solution, then whatever. I mean, that's an area like be careful what you wish for. Like Kaimi had some really good games, and he's got a strong leg. But that'll eventually, I think, be one of those areas where we're talking about them rolling with young kickers in the future once they have to pay Stanley and CJ and Will Anderson Jr. Those are going to be the three big contracts coming down the pike, are those three. And there maybe you're got to cut corners in, but I don't think that's happening now. Chuck goes on to say, I'm rooting for the Commanders going forward this year. Daniels looks like a CJ replay from last year. They actually have weapons for him. I would add to that, Chuck, that Daniels is a very fleet of foot as well, whereas CJ just seems to be learning that his legs are an option. Daniels came into the league with that. Jaden Daniels is really good. I loved him at LSU. What do you think the Cowboys are doing right now? It's an NFC East, NFC Championship. Oh, there's two NFC East teams playing in the championship game. I got you. I love that, Chuck says. They're probably, I don't know, I would say they're freaking out, although Jerry Jones just seems more detached than anything else, and he would be freaking out about the Eagles and the Commanders. There's a chance that he doesn't even know that those two teams are playing each other right now in the NFC title game. I'm kidding, maybe. I don't know what the Cowboys are doing. They're interviewing Brian Schottenheimer for the head coaching job. That's just got to be a horrible spot to be in. Trust me, I don't feel any pain for Cowboy fans. I'm glad they're suffering. That's got to be a terrible spot to be in right now, knowing that your next head coach might be the promoted offensive coordinator that nobody else is interviewing for a head coaching job right now. That's brutal. All right, Chris in the ATL. The Chiefs game reminded me of a college class where the Texans were acing all their quizzes and tests throughout the semester, yet failed because 75% of their grade was dependent on the final that they skipped because they were hungover from the night before. That final was made up of one part pass blocking and one part special teams. And to make it worse, Mahomes is the privileged doofus who gets a 4-0 because his daddy funded the new student center. Oh, there's times with emails. There's sometimes people send emails and I don't read the whole thing on a podcast. I'll get some preamble paragraphs. Sometimes I'll just cut to the chase with a question. That's really funny. I'm glad I read that paragraph on the podcast. Chris's question is: the professor gives the Texans a summer project to help them pass, which is based on what should they do with their first round pick. It can only be one of these options below. What should they pick and why? Okay, I like these questions. We're starting to get draft questions. All right, you guys have recovered quickly. That's the first sign of recovery, draft questions. Okay, so they can only pick one of these three things: a wide receiver to add a weapon, an offensive guard, regardless if there are better skill positions available, or number three, trade out of the first round to get multiple second and third rounders and take your chances on what's best available, regardless of need. I'd rather stay in the first round, although they did a pretty good job moving down last year, getting that extra 2 and trading it for Diggs, which I thought was a great move. I would do it again and hope that he doesn't tear his ACL. If he doesn't tear his ACL, I think that trade is real good. So, and I know you guys are like, yeah, duh. My point is, a torn ACL is not the fault of the team. Like, if they made that trade and he sucked, then I would say that's your fault, Texans. But a torn ACL, I can't hang that on the team. The wide receiver would be fun. You know me. Half of my answer on this stuff is going to be what makes things most enjoyable. What's the most radio podcast friendly? And taking a wide receiver as a weapon, I think, would be really, really good. They need talent on the offensive line. I honestly think The offensive line, I think they need to probably find I would dip into free agency on the offensive line and find a reliable veteran, not Shaq Mason from a couple years ago, a reliable veteran to plug in the interior of that offensive line somewhere. I'd be more inclined to take a weapon. Trading out of the first round, I don't know if I want to do that 2 years in a row. I like the first round. I like the draft party. They had one last year, but it was for the second and third round. That's not as much fun. And then a question for me, Chris asks, what was your least favorite course at Notre Dame and how many times did you skip it? I don't think people realize how much I skipped class in college. I'm mad at myself now, lo these many years later. I say, man, I'm coming up on 35 years since I graduated, 34 years since I graduated from Notre Dame. I skipped a lot of classes. My least favorite classes, it's a good question. I wasn't wild about the theology classes. It's not because I don't like religion or anything like that. I don't believe in God. I believe in God. You're getting the purely Catholic version of the theology classes. I would have been more interested in a theology class where I'm learning more about the views of different religions. Not that I'm going to all of a sudden convert to being a snake handler or something like that, but I would have been more interested in a theology class that studies various religions. At that time, there was no way I was getting that at Notre Dame. Every theology class had to do with Catholicism, and we had to take two. That's the thing. We had to take two philosophy courses. I didn't like philosophy. Two theology courses. I'm more into the stuff that's kind of numbers related, modern world related, current event related stuff. I was a finance major. I really didn't like the finance courses that much, but I was a finance major mostly because I thought that would set me up to be successful after college. Never worked a day in finance, not one. I didn't go to Wall Street or the Chicago Board of Trade or do anything like that. I got a finance degree, and I was in sales a month later selling phone systems out of college for a good company. And I did well in sales for many, many years. Ended up working for a couple startups and whatnot. I never worked a day in finance. I worked now more in radio. I think I crossed over from a majority of my professional career being in radio as opposed to sales probably like a year ago. I was hired for my first job in June 1991. So I think my start date was like June 15th, 1991. And my last day in sales was in February of 2007. So maybe a little later than that, probably summer of 2007. So we're talking 16 years I was in sales. And then I got into radio August of 2007. And now here we are. It's January of 2025. So I'm 17 years plus. Yeah, so I crossed over a couple years ago. So I'm more of a radio guy than I am a sales guy now. That's, I'm both really, because there's a big component of radio that is sales. Even though there's a lot of radio people that don't realize that. If you're a personality on the air, you are a salesperson too. That's my view of it. That's my view of it. All right. So there's enough about me. Thank you for asking about me though, Chris. I appreciate it. It was my birthday yesterday. So thank you for indulging me to talk about myself for a little bit. I haven't been talking about myself nor giving myself enough credit of late. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. BK sends in a long email to Mr. Pendergast, head of Utopia, Smack Talk champion, and voice of Texans pre- and post-game. We had us a season. Quick list of things from the game against Kansas City. Christian Harris only played one snap. We actually ran the ball well. Dalton Schultz hasn't been physical since that Case Keenum pass in Tennessee. Those things are all true. That's me saying that. BK continues, we ain't ending this thing on a negative. We're closer now than we were last year. KC knows it. Playing these games at home will undoubtedly put flags in pockets. But, Sean, I want to make sure your Mailbag Mafia, get their just due. Oh, I'm cool with this. Okay. France in the North. He mentions Chris in the ATL, who we just read. Anybody in Australia. That's I forget who it is. My apologies to the emailer from Melbourne. We have a Melbourne emailer. We have a Budapest emailer, Dennis. We've got a Monterey emailer, Dario in Monterey. We've got Neil in Liverpool. We're global. He names also, BK names, Ban in the South there. Joe Q. And then somebody in the Shug, that's Ryan in the Shug. Ryan in the Shug stopped by and said hello at the pregame. That might be my favorite part about this podcast is that, I don't know, like our audience growth numbers have been good year over year. I don't have a real target on where I'm taking this thing. You know, like I'm just doing it. I like doing it for you guys every week. Hopefully you enjoy it. It crosses over a lot. It gives me good topics with Payne and Pendergast. It crosses over into the radio show a lot. You know, we're talking about the same thing. So there's not a ton of work that goes into it. It's just a different audience that I'm talking to. You guys send in a lot of emails that if you listen to the radio show, we end up using the topics on the radio show. I usually like to give credit for those things. So yes, there's a lot of good with the podcast. I don't know where I was going with this. But that's been my favorite thing is like meeting some of you. Like there's a lot of you come by the pregame show, and I think it's really cool, especially those of you that travel from outside the state or even outside the country. You know, I mentioned Dennis from Budapest. He came by, you know, when he was in town. You know, I think Dario in Monterey I met at one of the pregames this year. I'm pretty sure. And Ryan and Shug I just met at the playoff game, so that was really cool. So good job. All right, I'm gonna keep it moving. BK, it's a long email. I appreciate everything you all your sentiments in this email. I appreciate. I just want to keep it moving. He does say, P.S. John Runyon remains a punk ass bitch and is still suspended for 3 games. Good job, BK. Appreciate you. Jack in downtown, new emailer to the show. Please see below for my final take on the 2024 season. Overall, I feel more positive. I'm going to see how many of these takes I agree with. Overall, I feel more positive than negative. I'm going to give that one a ding. Yes, I feel more positive. It's arrow up for this team for me. Because I think the things that need to be fixed are largely fixable, specific. It's not a long list. In other words, they're going to go into the draft. Remember 2 years ago when they went into the draft, and for every team they'd have needs. You know, like Kansas City needs left guard, cornerback, you know, and something else. You know, they need a Buffalo needs running back, wide receiver, blah, blah, blah. You get to the Texans and it would say needs, and it would just be a laughing, crying emoji. You know what I mean? Or the equivalent of that. Like, it needs everything. You need everything. We're not there anymore, so that's good. Jack says the Texans defense is Super Bowl caliber. Agreed. Cut down on the big plays. You let those big chunk plays up to Kelsey. If you don't do that, you win that game against Kansas City. Jack says the Texans are lucky the AFC South is so shit, or they would have been in danger of missing playoffs. It's true, but that's the division that you're in, and I think they're going to have a stranglehold on it for a little while. The other 3 teams are a mess. They're a mess. The other 3 teams in the division. Now, if the Titans draft first overall and get the quarterback right, and it's Shedeur or Cam Ward, and he gets things, we saw it in Houston. With CJ 2 years ago, we saw it with Jaden Daniels this year. You get that right, you get a couple other things right, and you can get right back in the mix. So that's this. Ironically, the sport with the biggest rosters, the NFL, is the one where we seem to see way more churn and way more worst to first, that kind of thing. Jack says, also important to remember how many key injuries the Texans dealt with this season. Yeah, they've had horrible injury luck the last 2 years. It's got to balance out at some point, I would think. Bring on 2025. I agree. All right, let's keep it moving. Jason Leander. Sean, thanks for making a frustrating season more fun. Your show is the real MVP. Thank you. I appreciate that, Jason. 2 questions. Which UFL team will Fairbairn play for? He's going to be on the team next year, guys. I hate to tell you that. He's going to be on the team. I know he disappointed us greatly in that game, but he's not going anywhere. Number 2, is D'Amico on the hot seat heading into 2025, at least a warm seat? Nope. His seat is ice cold. There is no termination pressure on D'Amico Ryans. I don't have a big problem with that. I love D'Amico. I think D'Amico, I think there were things that he did not improve at this year that disappoint me. I think the game management and the sideline operation and some of that stuff in game was bad. I don't think you lose as many games as they do that are just highly improbable losses based on the stat sheet without coaching being a big culprit in that. So D'Amico deserves some blame. But overall, I'm very positive still about D'Amico. Ryan from the Shug, speak of the devil. His mailbag question, how many turnovers or what turnover margin? Okay, his mailbag question, this is a mailbag question that came in before the Chiefs game. how many turnovers. I'm always interested to read these that come in. How many turnovers or what turnover margin did the Texans need to win the Chiefs? Oh, do they need? This is from before. The Texans finished +1 against the Chargers, but their momentum following the turnovers was much higher. This week, I think the Chiefs put up a tougher fight, so the Texans probably +2. I said +2 before the game. Neither team turned the ball over. It was a very clean game played from that standpoint. So I feel good about +2. In the end, they needed a couple turnovers to win that game. And Ryan in the Shug also says, nice meeting you at the Charger. Nice meeting you too, Ryan in the Shug. That was really cool. I was glad you stopped by. Let's see. Chris and KC. First, let me say I was at the game. I haven't been to a game live in quite a while. Let me tell you, it was a blast. Arrowhead is a classic venue in the elements. The atmosphere was great. I've been to a game at Arrowhead. It is awesome. The fans are great. The atmosphere is great. The only thing I hate is Patrick Mahomes and all his bullshit sliding and Kermit voice. That's the only thing I really hate about the Chiefs. I like pretty much everything else. But unfortunately, Patrick Mahomes, it's kind of like that email we got earlier. Like, he's the grade. He's 75% of the Chiefs' grade. He's the final exam. Thing I enjoyed most, Chris says, was they go largely unaccounted for when people consider going to a game versus watching on TV. I didn't have any TV commentators inundating me with replays and opinions. It was so nice just being immersed in watching the game. It wasn't until I got home I got to see how egregious the roughing calls were, but I won't harp on the calls. Let me stop there. I would actually rather have the commentary being inundated. We watch in the press box, and we don't get any of the commentary. We watch live with our own eyes, and then the TVs are about 15 seconds behind the live action. I actually like to hear what the announcers have to say on those broadcasts. So I disagree on that, Chris. But to each their own. I'm not judging you or anything. Says second, while I feel we played well enough to win, offensive line notwithstanding, we outgained them, couldn't convert yards into points. If we want to make a deep playoff run, we need to get a higher seed and force these teams to come to us. I think the team is realizing that. I've been saying that since the playoffs started, that the only way that they're going to get to where they want to go. I mean, D'Amico pounded this home on his coach's show and in his press conferences, the desire to get to the AFC title game. He's not even saying Super Bowl, just get to the AFC title game. I think they're realizing they've got to be way more on the details in the regular season. They cost themselves the divisional round back in week 9, losing to the Jets, and week 10, coughing up a lead to the Lions. Week 12, losing to Will Levis at home. Throwing for 86 yards against the Packers in week 7 when you had a +3 turnover margin in that game. You had a near pick 6 on like third play from scrimmage in that game. That's where you lost the divisional round. You're 100% right, Chris. They need to be at home for these games. The 2 seed, I will settle for nothing short of the 2 seed in the upcoming season. 2 seed, at least you get the divisional round at home. You know what I mean? You get 2 home games. You got to beat the 7 seed, which you should be able to do. And then you get whoever they reseeded after the first round. So whoever the 2 seed dictates you get, that's who you get. But you get them at home. So yeah. All right. Let's see. What else? Chris wraps up by saying, thanks. It was a great season. Love listening every week. Appreciate that very much, Chris. Lots of promise and things to work on. Keep on keeping on. I shall. All right. Joe Q is in. You knew Joe Q would get in before the end of the season. Says, with the season now closed, we turn to postmortem. 2 questions. Seems to me that it's challenging to separate the players from the coaches. The players provide physical and mental abilities and efforts. The coaches work at least 3 different levels: scheme install, weekly game plan, and then play-to-play signal calling. What is your methodology or framework from your years of doing this to help assign credit and blame to players versus coaches? What have you learned from Clint Stoerner and Seth Payne on this question? That last part's really good. I've not had a chance to really reflect on what I've necessarily learned from Clint and Seth on assigning blame. When it comes from me personally, it's the things I get. I'll just rank this by the things I get most upset with when it comes to each of those. With players, the things I get most upset with are mental errors, silly penalties, and then effort, like the things that are much more things that are like to a large degree controllable. With coaches, to me, it's all about putting players in the proper position to be successful. For example, in that Kansas City game, the playoff game, I was more angry with Bobby Slowick that Dalton Schultz was asked to block George Karlaftis than I was at Schultz for being shitty at doing it. You know what I mean? Like we shouldn't be putting him in that position. So that's where coaches make me the most angry. The two things that make me the most angry with coaches, three things. One, that putting players in horrible positions to do things, willingly putting players in positions to do things that they do poorly. Number two, egregious game management penalties that a teenager playing Madden could avoid. And three, being told how hard it is to win in the NFL. I don't need to be told how hard it is to win in the NFL. Statistically, half the teams in the NFL win every week. So, we're just talking about degree of difficulty. If you were to tell me that only 10% of the teams playing in the NFL every week were able to win a game, I would say, yeah, that sounds awfully difficult. But last I checked, barring ties, or even including ties, half teams win every week in the NFL. So I don't need to hear about how hard your job is with the $10 million that you make. Go win games, okay? There's a lot of people with hard jobs. You know who's got a hard job? The people out in the 30-degree weather out my window right now with a crane that are putting a roof on this new high-rise across the street. That's hard. Coach your little football games, okay? So that has nothing to do with the performance of the team. It's just a pet peeve of mine. That's all. Joe Q says, to illustrate the challenge, Sam Darnold and C.J. Stroud each took 8 sacks in their season-ending loss. Conventional wisdom from Minnesota is Darnold sucks again. J.J. McCarthy is QB1. For the Texans, it's goddamn it, Nick. Fix this fucking O-line before C.J. gets killed. At some level, this is right, but isn't wildly oversimplified. It is. I think with Darnold, there's obviously a lot of baggage that comes with it. There's a lot of failure that comes with Sam Darnold that precedes his time in Minnesota. That there's a turning back into a pumpkin element with him. Whereas with CJ, he's largely been, I would say, above the line of good. With specific instances in terms of bad games. Not every game's been great, but in terms of like the graph of his career, I know a lot of people saying he's so much worse this year than last year. I don't think he's that much worse this year than he was last year. I just think he's got way less around him. I think this offense got bad. I think the play calling sucks. I think the interior of the offensive line is shitty. All those things. I admittedly put way less blame on CJ than other people do. So maybe I have a bias baked into this, but I think like specific to your example with Sam Darnold, yeah, it's oversimplified, and we live in a world where simplification is more comfortable. I've never been a huge Sam Darnold fan. I was happy for him. He was having, I don't hate him or anything. I thought it was cool he was having the year that he was having. The Detroit game in week 18, that was the old Sam Darnold. That's why I unloaded in the divisional round on the Rams, because I thought Sam Darnold looked like he turned back into Sam Darnold again. We'll see. What's my assessment of CJ moving forward? Do you believe Darnold will be a week 1 starter somewhere in 2025? I do. I do believe Darnold will be a week 1 starter. If you take inventory, there's plenty of places that need a starting quarterback, or at least a bridge quarterback. I think before he started slumping at the end of the year, you would have thought he might get like a Baker Mayfield contract where he's, $30+ million a year for 3 years. I think the end of the year might have scared some teams off of that, and maybe now he's probably closer to what he got in Minnesota. I think he'll get more than 1 year, $10 million. That's what he got in Minnesota. Probably somewhere in between that. But I think he'll be a starter. I'm very bullish on C.J. Stroud moving forward. I think if they fix some of the things around him, I think the second half of the Chargers game and the totality of the Chiefs game, even though I know they only put up 12 points offensively, CJ started to make some of the throws that it appeared in the middle of the season he was not able to make. So they got to get him weapons, and they got to fix the O-line. If they do those things, I've always said CJ Stroud with time to throw is one of the most dangerous human beings on the planet. So get him some time to throw. So I'm bullish on CJ Stroud. All right, Ben in the South going to wrap us up. Sean, thank you for all the grinding this season. They made it exciting, but we're just outmatched in the end. Next year, like Bum said, it's time to kick the damn door in. Wide receiver and interior O-line a must. That speedy kid from Texas, Bond, would be fun. Isaiah Bond, I believe is his name. That's me talking right now. I like Marcus Golden. If I'm taking a wide receiver from, or is it Matthew Golden? I think Marcus Golden is already in the league playing defensive line for somebody. Matthew Golden kid, the golden child from Texas. I really like him. He's got a little Tank Dell to him. Not just because he went to U of H and then transferred. Watching the refs test their gag reflex on Mahomes is getting very old. This is Ben talking, not Sean. I don't want to get fined by John Runyon. I think Texans lose even in a fair game, but we'll never know. It just turned obvious and offensive. Ben in the South. Yeah. Is what it is on the referee front. We'll see how it plays out in this weekend's games in the AFC title game. I'm taking Buffalo and Philadelphia. I'm taking Buffalo to beat Kansas City. I'll probably end up regretting that if history holds true, but I think the one thing I know, Josh Allen, even when they've been losing, puts up big numbers against Kansas City. And I don't know if this is the year where Kansas City has the firepower to keep up with an activated Josh Allen. So, but I'm looking forward to both these games. And I know Jalen Hurts is banged up in that Philly game. I just think this feels like one of those things where I know Jaden Daniels getting all sorts of love this week for how amazing he is and how incredible it would be for a rookie to get to the Super Bowl. I just think, that Philly's had some performances against Jaden Daniels too. The most recent one where he threw 5 touchdown passes. I'm guessing that Fangio has something for Jaden Daniels in this game, and I'm going to take the Eagles not only to win but to cover in that game. So those are my picks for this weekend. All right, big thanks to Anthony Irwin for getting the podcast out to all of you guys. Big thanks to all of you for listening to the podcast as well. We'll be back next week with another mailbag, houmailbag@gmail.com. Subscribe, rate, review. Have a great weekend watching football, everybody. We will see you next time.